Hi, everybody. Deborah King. Great to see you all. Thank you for joining me. And this is a meeting not just of my soul family, but also all of you out there on Facebook who want to think about the climate for a moment. I'm very conscious of it today. I'm in Southern California where the Santa Ana winds have started blowing in earnest this afternoon. And we Californians, Southern Californians, have become pretty nervous about fire as the fires have increased in size and intensity exponentially over, say, the past, let's say, 10 or 15 years. So before I get rolling, I want to make sure you stay on and hear from my special guest later in the hour, Carolyn Fonyo, who's the director of the Environmental Sciences grad program at Oregon State University. Carolyn is in my teaching program this year and my level 4 of my LifeForce Energy Healing Program, and she's going to become a force to be reckoned with as she develops her voice and steps up here for all things climate and environmental. So I'd be very interested to hear from her. But let me start off by talking about one of my favorite mentors, Jane Fonda, who you probably know was arrested last Friday, and she's going to be arrested 13 Fridays in a row for protesting on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., protesting climate change and refusing to step aside when she's, exercising, I think, her right to protest. So she's having a rally on the night before every Thursday night for these 13 Fridays. Imagine her dedication, okay, to do this. She's hosting online events to talk about nothing except global warming. So her big beef and the focus of her civil disobedience is she wants funds reinstated for the research and development of substitutes for fossil fuels. And she wants to talk about the social issues that are involved. And she wants to raise awareness for student strikes. So she calls them Fire Drill Friday. Very catchy, isn't it? And she talks about Greta. She says, Greta says to behave like it's a crisis. We all have to behave like our houses are on fire. So of course she's talking about Greta Thunberg from Sweden, that 16-year-old girl that just enlightened us all and set us all on fire. And all of us wish that we had some of Greta's resolve, don't we? And fearless approach. So I'm very impressed with Greta and her strike for climate. She led the largest climate strike in history back in September, if you'll recall. She got something like 4 million people in over 160 countries to participate. So go Greta, really, really impressive. So Greta too spends every Friday on strike. And this is why Jane Fonda is picking up on that theme. And Greta says, I'll go back to school when she's from the UK, when you in Parliament start to listen to science and give me a future, give us all a future. So let's talk about climate and what we know thus far. Let's just kind of do a little review here. So for the last 650,000 years, the Earth has been through 7 cycles of glaciers advancing and retreating. When I was a young woman, I used to go glacier climbing all the time, every summer. And the glaciers I climbed are non-existent now. When we drive down Highway 395, we don't see them anymore. They're missing, they're gone. So pretty disturbing, huh? Some parts of climate, of course, are natural trend, but this is not natural. So this warming of our climate is due to human activity since what, the mid-1900s. Ever since we started to depend on gas-driven machines and cars instead of horses. And it's moving so fast, we simply can't keep up with what's going on. The greenhouse gases that we're emitting are incredible. If you didn't get a chance to read my blog this week, take a moment. You'll find it on my website, and take a second and read it. It's on the same topic, and it's pretty disturbing information. So why do we know that global warming is a fact and is true? Because science says it is. There's absolutely no two shakes about it. The average temperature of the Earth's surface has risen more than 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit since 1800. That's a huge increase. And this is all due to, carbon dioxide. Since 2010 alone, we've had the 5 warmest years on record. As far back as records have been kept. So the oceans can absorb a lot of this increase in heat, but they're giving up. And consequently, our ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica are disappearing. In fact, Greenland's lost over almost 300 billion tons of ice. That's a lot of ice. So glaciers are retreating everywhere, not just in the Sierra Nevadas that I mentioned earlier, my own glacier experience, but I've also climbed on glaciers in Europe, and they're retreating just as fast. It's everywhere. It's the Himalayas, it's the Rockies, it's Alaska, it's everywhere. We need ice, and ice is disappearing. So what happens when everything warms up like that is our sea levels go up. And in the last 20 years, it's almost double the 8 inches that we had in the previous century. So we're more than exponentially increasing our rise in our sea level. So then you're living here on this planet. You've noticed what I've noticed is everything's more extreme, right? Don't you notice it's hotter when it's hot and it's colder when it's cold? When it rains harder. Hurricanes are bigger. Droughts are longer. Tornadoes are more intense. Wildfires, and that's the one that I know, wildfires are much bigger than I ever recall. I'm a native Californian. I've been through probably, personally, probably 6 wildfires with personal knowledge of, say, another dozen or so. And I've never seen anything like what we've had in the last 3 years, since about 2017. They're so much hotter. They move so much quicker. They are so much more devastating. They are so much more out of control. They can't be controlled. Everyone just runs for the hills, and not everyone survives. Look at all the people that died in the fall of 18 from the big fires in that big fire in Northern California, at Paradise, California, where all those people fried, trying to escape their vehicles out on the road. The road got jammed and they all died running through the forest. I mean, it's just horrendous when you think about it. So if that's what's going on today, I want you just to think about what it would look like in 50 or 100 years if we leave this unchecked, as we are right now. We're not doing anything, okay? In fact, our current government is like retreating from doing anything. It's taking steps backwards, not forwards. So the National Oceanic Administration, part of the government, tells us that in 80 years, 6 cities are going to be underwater, completely obliterated. That's Miami Beach, Atlantic City, New Orleans, Galveston, Charleston, Virginia Beach, and over 600 other coastal towns. Those are just the big ones I named. But at the same time, while that part of the world is too wet, other parts of the world are going to be turned into desert, and they weren't before, but they've become desert. Our population in that same period of time, it will be 9 billion people. So food production has to go up more than 50% to accommodate all these people. So we're going to have big food shortages. So there's going to be social upheaval. If you think it's bad now, it's going to be so much worse. There are going to be civil wars. We'll have mass extinction of animals and plant species. It's going to be possibly the last existential threat to human civilization. We may be looking at the end. We may be able to see the end, out there, not too far distant time. So constantly be asking yourself, what can you do? What can you do personally? I think I mentioned in my blog that I finally bit the bullet and invested in solar. And I tell you, it wasn't cheap, but it eliminates all my need for electricity, for as long as I live in that house. And I just felt like I had to do something to, besides you know, separating my trash. I just, you know, I just had to do something more aggressive. So that's something you could think about. Remember, the tipping point is 2 degrees Celsius in temperature. And they say that after that, this is a non-recoverable event. If we go past 2% more warm, and right now we're at 1.5. So we're at 1.5 here in just a few years. In my lifetime, we will be at a 1.5 degree Celsius increase. And that's very, very, very risky. So at that point, we'll have no ice sheets. Our water levels will be high. Major cities will be underwater. Severe drought will probably kill the Amazon. Hate to be such a gloomy gloom and doom right now, but I'm just laying it out there for you. You know, the rainforest is the world's largest carbon offset, but you saw it was on fire, all of the month of August and September. If you think back, there was a big heat wave in Europe not that many years ago, and you know, 15,000 people alone in France died. So from heat. So your body can't manage much of a, if your core temperature rises much, it just simply can't function and cells start to die. So think that the coral reefs would be gone, the rainforest gone, the Arctic gone, animal species gone, and that leaves what? Us? So in my blog, I mentioned I asked whether or not you believed in reincarnation, because if you do, like a third of the planet does, we'll be back for this. You realize we'll be back for this event, even if you think it's going to happen after you're long gone. And if you don't believe in reincarnation, what about your kids or your siblings' kids or your neighbors' kids, or if you have kids, their kids? Are we really working toward mass extinction? What can we do? What do we do when we see Jane Fonda taking more action than we are? What can we do? So, you know, I want you to picture a different world. I want you to picture right now, maybe you get up and take the car to work. Instead, picture getting up and taking an all-electric tram. Picture getting up and not hearing construction all around you, all run by, I must tell you, machines that are operating on gasoline, right? But instead, picture them running on solar power. Just think how quiet everything would be. Think how pure the air would be. And look at what some other countries have done. Iceland has completely gotten rid of carbon and is only using hydropower and geothermal. Europe is now going to be 90% carbon free by 2040, which is only 20 years from now. Canada is at 81% carbon free. NASA says the world is greener today than it was 20 years ago, especially in China and India. You know, India has done amazing things. It's so impressive the amount of solar they've put in. And China and India, they're hugely populated, right? And they have these immense tree planting programs. The Indians have planted 50 million trees in one day using 800,000 people. So do the math, you can see it was a busy day, but they accomplished it. And both China and India had these huge deforestation problems, large scale ones in the last decade or two, all the way back to the 70s, as I recall. And now they're recovering, you see, by getting aggressive and planting trees. Denmark held a telethon to protect the climate and raised millions of trees and millions of dollars. The Swiss have reforested half their country. So other countries are really getting on the bandwagon. Scotland has added 22 million new trees. And this, I talk about this in my blog. The 20 African countries banded together and built the Great Green Wall, which is 6,000 miles of foliage across, you know, half the Sahara. So as a result, their groundwater wells are starting to refill, and that means more food and more revenue, and not a drought and not starvation. Even the nuclear wasteland at Chernobyl, perhaps you've seen the documentary / it's a docudrama, as I recall. It's well worth seeing. but even that nuclear wasteland of Chernobyl is being reforested, and it has solar. So even it could be resuscitated. We thought that land was dead, right? So there are glimmers of hope everywhere. And what I ask you today is, what can you do to make an impact? You know, you personally, what can we each do? Well, the first thing we can do is stop thinking and behaving divisively. We've got somehow to pull ourselves together. I saw so much of this. I was quite taken with Game of Thrones. I don't know if you've seen it, but I highly recommend it. I put off seeing it until recently because I was, I got as far as season 1, the third one, and they, you know, beheaded a horse, and I couldn't handle that, and I turned it off and didn't come back for what, almost 10 years, I guess. But anyway, I watched the whole thing recently. It's a big commitment, but it has very interesting ethics and very interesting concepts. It's very futuristic in its own way. And I don't want to be a plot spoiler, but one of the things that they do discover is that pulling together is the solution. That these separate families, couldn't survive unless they pulled together against a threat that was bigger than all of them. Again, I don't want to spoil the plot. It's an amazing, amazing production. But what if we pulled together the Kurds and the Turks and the Democrats and the Republicans and the Israelites and the Palestinians and the whites and the blacks? I mean, honestly, what if we got rid of division and instead went into, if I might say, divine feminine thinking and started thinking collectively? So if we don't, and we think about the immigration problem that people are now talking about, I don't believe we have one, but we might if South America becomes a desert. There might be a real immigration problem if we have a billion people, climate refugees, all trying to pile on the one last place that maybe is livable. And remember, our coastal cities will be underwater if we don't take action, and that's a lot of people for us. Those of us that don't live on the coast, that's a lot of people to absorb. So the greatest gift that that me and you and all of us could give mankind right now is a thought of unity. So after you meditate every day, you might spend a few minutes thinking about and saying a prayer for humanity, where you collectively picture us all united to save our planet. Every nationality, every belief, every ethnicity, where we picture ourselves all united. Okay, I'm gonna look for my special guest, and give me a minute here because I have a lot of people here and I have to find her. Here's Carolyn. So Carolyn Fonyo, great to see you. Come join me. Hi there. Very nice to see you, Carolyn, and welcome.
I did just a second. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Nice to be
So
here.
again, yeah, and to see you, and just to reintroduce you, you manage an environmental program in Oregon, is that correct? At the university there?
Yes, the graduate program.
And can you tell us what theories you're addressing or solutions that you're working on?
Well, we're an interdisciplinary program, so we have 8 different areas of concentration for students to focus on, including climate change, biogeochemistry, social sciences, environmental education, ecology, natural resources, and water resources. And so students can focus on one of those areas and also either pursue a PhD, a Master of Science, or a Professional Science Master's, which is a hybrid of science and business. And we offer that degree, the PSM degree, online as well as on campus. So students that are already working can pursue their degree while they're continuing to live where they're living, and change their careers or change their positions. And so for me, that's very sustainable way of educating, because you don't have to leave everything, pack up, move, and there's a lot of resources involved with moving. So it does help people stay in place, continue in their current work, and not having to move families, et cetera, and pursue their degrees. And so the students in our program, it's really varied, the different topics that they're focusing on. And social science students often focus on policy. So look at the interface between science and policy making, decision making, and deal with stakeholder engagement. And so really understanding what the role of scientists is in the decision making process, because over time, when you're talking about scientists have the answers, but really, do people believe science anymore? So that's
now, hold on, that's a really interesting question you just asked. Do you think people don't believe science?
Well, it declined. It was declining for quite a while. I think it's actually increased more recently because of the fact that I think people are worried or fearful about not knowing, and so sort of wanting to trust scientists again. Somebody has to have the answers, right? Or somebody kind of needs to know.
Well, let me ask this question, because I'm not nearly as abreast of local, current thinking as you would be, because this is your field. It used to be that you would hear politicians be client deniers. Are there still client deniers out there in the political world? Are they still a couple idiots surviving?
I think the thing, it's
They
really
aren't extinct.
It's a difficult question, because you can't deny that climate changes, right?
No, it's in front of us.
Right. And so but the fact is, whether you're saying global warming, and that's more specifically, and then the anthropogenic sources. And so more and more there's evidence, obviously.
Yeah, because you could tell I prepared for this discussion today. I did quite a bit of research.
Yeah, you did. I really was impressed with your newsletter. That was awesome. You know more than I do.
I really scurried around and read everything, and I couldn't find anybody that was respected in any way that was any longer denying the fact. And the average citizen just looks out the window now and knows there's global warming. It doesn't take a scientist.
Well, and there's other aspects like ocean acidification, for instance. But the thing is, for scientists to actually say, and this is what I try to teach my students in class, and I bring in a guest speaker who talks about science versus advocacy, because the role of scientists is to say, yes, there's change, but you're not going to say it's good or bad. So you're not making value judgments. You try to remain objective and let other people make the decisions. But truly, the thing that's really important is to have goals. Because if you don't have goals, then your science really needs to be pointing to something. What is the question? And the questions need to be really clear, and metrics need to be really clear. What are you measuring? What is the question? What are you trying to determine? And is there a policy? Are you trying to regulate something? What's the outcome? So that decisions don't get hung up as much in the political process, because you have more clear objectives to begin with.
Well, let me ask you this question. What's the most exciting thing you've seen from your vantage point, your position of expertise in this field? Exciting in the way of, hey, this could turn things around for mankind.
Well, I mean, I think, for me personally, I studied environmental engineering and environmental sciences because I was curious. I wanted to know how things work. And, back then, many moons ago, the concerns were just beginning. The limits to growth was new in the early 70s. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, and my own major professor, H.T. Odom, were talking about systems and, talking about the interactions between systems and our impacts. And so the main thing that, things haven't changed too much in terms of understanding prediction, but certainly having a basic understanding of how things work and cause and effect, that people really on a daily basis understand what our own personal behavior does, what kind of impacts, and not even just assuming that even for instance, solar is better than fossil fuel because if you calculate like all of what it took to get all of the rare earth minerals or whatever that it takes to in mining. Like
well, let me just interject something on a real personal and factual level, Carolyn, that'll help our viewers here. So when I was talking about how I went solar last month, what that involved was ponying up about 2 years of electrical bills, handing them to the solar company, but then getting the promise from the government that I would get a third of it back this year. So actually, folks, you're only paying 2/3 of your quote electrical cost in front, and then from then on for the rest of your duration in that house or that building, you have no more electrical costs. So it's very attractive. You just have to bite the bullet and spend a few dollars to make it happen.
Yeah,
it's very attractive. It's silent, and you feel so good about it. You're using the sun.
Right. And using the sun, the more directly you can use it, growing your own plants, you know, growing your own vegetables, etc. The more direct, the less processing, the less transportation.
That's right. Yeah, you don't have to. Right.
Certainly. It makes a huge.
Right. You don't have to drive anywhere to buy your lettuce.
Yes, and so, but you know, the thing is that there are all these hidden costs, right? There are hidden costs, energy costs, and resource costs. So it's really
solar
to understand all of everything it takes to make something. I mean, that's what my background is in, and that's really about like understanding more about the energetics of systems. And
just to speak to one other point that I discovered in the process of investigating solar, because once I got going and talking to the couple big solar companies and getting bids, I found out that which is this is a big concern where I am in California with forest fires. This year, because of the 2 massive fires we had last year, both of which were caused by some failure on the power company's fault, the electrical company's fault, Southern California Edison in my case. What they're doing, they're like it's really interesting what they've done this year. They've announced that you got an attitude about those fires last year, that you're trying to sue us because of course big lawsuits were filed because it was the power company's fault. And millions of homes were burnt and thousands of people were dislocated and a lot of people died. So the way they're fixing it is they're turning the power off now when there are fire conditions. So I'm expecting my power to go off this afternoon.
Wow.
No kidding. And it'll be off probably a couple days. And that'll, the power company's saying, well, that's the end of that. You can't sue me now.
So I just had
I think it violates some federal regulation.
Some students in my class just did this project on PG&E last week. Right. And it is such a huge can of worms. I mean, it's incredible, right? And
they have so much power. How can we stop them?
And it's a publicly traded company. And then you look at who's behind it, and it's really complicated, right? And that's where, how do you parse through, the control mechanisms?
Well, how do you even go after a monolith agency that's in partnership with the government?
Right, exactly.
Where do you even start?
Right. Yes, and they own a lot of land, right? So that's another factor. So I mean, it's really and then they're maybe going to go bankrupt, and then what does that mean? That the government then
we have no power.
The state gets the land back, less expensively. I mean, it's really hard. That's the problem. That's why the solutions are not that simple, because it's the layers are just so complex. But like my feeling is, it really is important to stay optimistic. And for one thing, when the Industrial Revolution began, there was like innovation and a discovery. And so I don't really, feel that like things were done intentionally, even with medicine, there was like trying to save lives, and then things just get more complex and more difficult to unravel. Large systems are complex and hard to unravel. So what I see when you say, what am I most excited about, especially because I also teach humanitarian engineering, students and young people that are just developing amazing innovations and solutions, like just simple solutions, but that there are so many opportunities now for entrepreneurs. And that's just individually, you know, you see, oh, there's a better way to do something, you know, that, you know, anybody can think, wow, you know, I can do this and it will take this much, you know, less.
Well, you just raised a really interesting point. You said, oh, I have students that are studying that issue, because I have been literally wandering around the California communities now for, let's say, 3 months since the power companies announced that, they're just going to turn their power off anytime the wind comes up, so that, you know, they can't be liable. And I keep, as an attorney, I keep thinking about, that can't be legal. I keep saying to myself, there must be some legislation that someone could assert to stop them from turning our power off. Well, it's a think tank like you have growing there in Oregon with your advanced PhD candidates, probably, who can come up with the best answer. It'll probably be somebody in a cross program that's crossed perhaps with law, you know, who will come up with a solution. Isn't that possible?
I think I think you're exactly right. The legal aspects are, you know, and then what happens is something goes smart. It'll stay there forever, like the Clean Water Act. I mean, if the president wanted to, like,
got it?
Yeah, disembowel it. I mean, but that would take forever, right? And so the one thing that I find really interesting is that there's, like, right now there may be like less research dollars available, like from the federal government, but there's more innovation happening in the private sector. The jobs are like expanding in the environmental field. And so having it being spread out more, it's kind of like, you know, all firms need accountants, right? Everybody needs accountants and lawyers. But people having the basic understanding and knowledge, even when you're going to work in whatever capacity or whatever career, that people are understanding and thinking things through. And I'm seeing that, you know, that's just happening more and more. And for me, that's really encouraging. And so it's really hard to predict. A prediction is never easy, right? Scientists nobody predicts things very well, right? We have all kinds of intricate models, and it's not that easy to predict, but certainly making the efforts and how, you know, from on a day-to-day basis, and having more innovation and like having things really spread out more through the whole system, so that, you know,
I have a little freeze going on there from Carolyn. I wonder if her connectivity. Oh, there you are, Carolyn. You're back.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know.
No problem. Go ahead. I'm
anyway. So what I'm just saying is that the positive part to me is seeing it being more widespread. You know, the understanding basic, like the interest in the environment is like, even if it seems like under dire conditions, that people have a lot more interest, which is great. And so, and you know, environmental education is another piece that's really important. That free choice learning, where people go out to, you know, the aquariums or wherever they're going, and really can learn, you know, interactively, very young. And so in the schools, really young, it's being taught, you know, basic environmental sciences and understanding about the world and how it works, the earth. So that all of that, you know, takes time. But you really see like that, you know, how much that's expanded, right? I mean, these conversations, we're having this conversation for a soul family. I mean, that's amazing.
That's exciting. It's exciting. Yeah, and there are a lot of people interested, because I see the numbers here. There's a lot of people here today who are trying to, you know, think about how they're going to survive.
And also to see how it's connected in their own spiritual life, right? And
exactly. Yeah, and that's why I talked about unity and not divisiveness and connectivity. Exactly. And I know I don't know, have you seen Game of Thrones? Because
no, I can't.
I recommend it. I'm probably going to lecture on it here this quarter. Seriously, I've got so much good out of it. I'll admit it is a little on the violent side.
Yeah.
But if you
I haven't, but I know it must be amazing.
Like a Western, you know, where people are, you know, shooting them up out in the street. If you sort of adopt that mentality, you'll make it through. Otherwise, it's fairly violent. But there were so many elements of them finding, this is back in like 1300s, okay, of them finding that if they weren't separate families, separate factions, hating each other and trying to destroy each other, which is kind of where we're at today, that they could actually solve the world's problem. They had a behemoth enemy that they all shared. And so that, that's the whole point of this long series, is to try to get together to defeat this enemy that will kill them all. And that's where we're at. That's where we are at as a world, is we're now facing the possible extinction of the human race. I mean, it's no joke. We actually are.
I think it's important to understand. I think the understanding is really important to know that, if human race extinction versus saving the world, like in terms of the earth will survive, right? The earth will
we might not.
The earth will be fine.
Yeah.
and Mother Nature is
very
doing
hot
her thing, she's just re-equilibrating,
it might be all on fire for, a
Right.
couple million years, and then, and then revegetate. But
Right.
that we can't survive that.
So that is really the thing, is like, how do we as a species, as a population, yes, unity is a really important part, but also like, the population numbers, like what really is sustainable. Whoops, sorry.
No, you're still here. Well, that was a popular topic when I was, for example, in college. There was a lot of discussion about family and limiting the number of kids you have. And I noticed it's not even mentioned anymore. It's like it went out of style. What happened to that?
Right. Because that's not going to be very popular either. And that does cross lines with religion, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the unity piece is really critical, because it's like the fear that's being generated now, and the divisiveness is really, it's how to bring people together more, and to be more positive and excited about like doing things differently and doing.
Right. Yeah, because when I was preparing to talk to you today, I as I said, I booked up and did some research, and it was all very dark. And then I tried toward, the end of my thoughts on it, tried to come up with some positive spin on it, to help attract people to create change. But I had a hard time. So I bet you have some students, though, or yourself. Maybe you can tell us about a couple of optimistic.
Well, I have one student right now who's trying to develop like a new eco-housing model, like a design, so you can grow your own food inside the home.
Or on the roof.
Mm-hmm. And inside, actually.
And
inside the home, like greenhouses within the home space, but everything like renewable and very eco-friendly, sustainable. And so
interesting.
Looking to develop communities like that, like, based on this eco-housing. But and they are out there already. There are different businesses and companies that do offer, similar kinds of housing alternatives.
I lived in alternative housing when I was in an ashram. They were building houses that were made out of peat. And I lived in one of those for a while. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So housing is a big factor, right? And how we
so
do
that we don't harvest wood.
All right. Well, and I think one thing that was interesting about the growing trees, and this is, haven't seen enough research on this yet, but when you have the big fires, and then all of a sudden, not only does all that carbon go up back into the atmosphere at once, right? After having, but also you're using all the fire retardants. And so
all those chemicals.
All those chemicals are showing up. Yeah. So there's always trade-offs, right? These are the trade-offs. That's like, well, okay, you're growing more trees, but it's warming up, and then, there's more fires, there's more wildfires. So then you're exacerbating the problem. So a lot of it really has to do, like, where are people located? Even in the shorter run, how do we deal with disaster management more effectively?
And I've always been very guilty, me personally, of wanting to live, what do they call that, where you're living on the edge between the urban and and we're, those of us that lean that direction, we're causing problems, of course, because we're building or buying a home in an area that really can't sustain human habitation.
So that's the thing. And if there is some kind of a disaster, do you rebuild there? Do you use insurance money to
use some sense and move elsewhere?
Yeah, and then the thing where, and it's difficult because as things are warming, then the agriculture is shifting, everything is shifting.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that right now. My last 2 or 3 homes are either in the national forest or right on the edge of it, and that, that's not the smartest thing.
Well, I mean, it's understandable though, because it's like beautiful and you want to live in
the air is good. The air is good because the trees, of course, generate great air for you.
Yes, I have trees all around me. That's definitely true. The same here. So, those are, I think, really understanding all the trade-offs. Really, there's always trade-offs, and really having people just learning and understanding more of the basics, and well, when you're making decisions, like when we're just making daily decisions, like really to learn and to understand more about what the trade-offs are.
Yeah, well, I guess one of the most common decisions we have to make personally on a real personal level is what car do we buy?
Right. Or do you even buy one? Like I have I drive a 97 CRV. It's not very efficient, but it's like, then is it more, is it take more resources to buy a new car?
A newer car.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's those trade-offs too. So, and just for driving around town. So, and people are definitely, I mean, I think people are getting much better about.
Much more conscious of it.
Much more conscious.
Yeah, back just to further give a tip here to our audience, when I was talking to the solar people, they told me that that I can, now that I have solar, I can buy a battery that the solar will keep powered, that will replace my need for power when the power is down, when there is no power, which I thought was pretty interesting. Right. So you can become fairly off the grid, fairly self-sustained.
And so batteries, that's huge, right? There's huge room for development.
Right. They say, the guy told me when I blanched at the cost of the battery and said, not this year, he said, just wait 12, 24 months, the battery will go down, in price. He said it'll be a fraction, like a television has. A television used to be, I don't know, thousands of dollars, and now the same TV is $700. He said the same thing will happen with batteries.
Right. So innovation in like alternative energy storage is huge. I mean, so there's all these opportunities for innovation, definitely. And people, can come up with something just being in their kitchen, right?
Right. Well, this is your field, definitely not mine. But I was so disturbed as I drove through Ojai, where I'm now living. This was maybe a month ago. It was National Earth Day or some celebration. And the streets were lined with kids. Nobody was over the age of 18. Most of them looked like they were 12, 13, 14. All with signs begging the drivers to please do something to save the earth for them. I mean, it was heartbreaking to see these little children out there, and they're suffering, Carolyn, from such anxiety. Kids are now.
A lot of anxiety, and like the news is not helping that at all.
No, it's one thing to be over 50 and think about these things, and it's quite another to be 10 or 15 years old and think, the earth may not even be here for me, or it may be so miserable I can't live on it. So I think we all need to really redirect ourselves to some degree in whatever little way or big way we can. Whether you write letters to your congressman, or you picket or petition, or congratulate Jane Fonda on her activity. I've always admired her.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, no, she is.
Yeah. So I think it's a really good point. Like, what can we do? Like, because like otherwise it's like watching the news and listening to it, and the fear generation, and like without being able to do something is really frustrating for people.
Can you tell us about another positive thing that's coming down the pike that you've heard about?
Well, I think with the humanitarian engineering in that area, like that's more for like
what is it?
Global development, like training engineers to be thinking more about social systems and environmental systems and resources. So in the past, when engineers would go overseas, like, and build projects, right? But then thinking, oh, people need this, right? This is a better way. But it's really using a different, looking at like, what do people need? Do you need anything? And maybe you're doing something already, like you're doing it better than we know how to do. So like better information exchange, even, so that, and preserving the cultural traditions that are being, you have the Amazon on fire, you've got tribes being wiped out, and you have a lot of like cultural, you have a lot of knowledge, right? That's also,
not just the tribes, but and not to diminish their importance, but also the trees. You know, I
Right.
mean, all of our herbs and pharmaceuticals, they all come from there.
A lot of information. So how do we preserve that information? You know, how do we catalog that? How do we get better understanding, and also from indigenous populations, like for better information exchange, so that we're not just imposing our way and, you know, assuming we know a better way to do it, but that actually looking at what the local resource base is, what, you know, what will they actually use? How can they maintain something? So that's not just for overseas projects, but it's also, but it is important because you think, okay, we had a chance to exploit resources and use them, but you don't like, so it's also difficult to say, well, other people don't have that opportunity, right? So really like teaching or learning how to do things everywhere around the globe, you know, more effectively. And so training our own people here, if they go overseas, to not, you know, to not assume that we have the answers. So that's kind of what humanitarian engineering is about. And those
Interesting. I've never even heard of it. And I've just invited Steve D'Amico to come join us. I see he's dropped a couple of interesting remarks here in the chat window. And Steve, you sound like you're kind of on top of this. Can we hear from you? Can you bring your camera live? And while we're waiting to see if Steve can join us, looks like he can. Hey, Steve. Meet our special guest, Carolyn, and here I'll unmute you. No, you're unmute. You have to unmute on your side, Steve. Tell everybody these thoughts you had about, you mentioned a documentary. What was it?
It's called The Need to Grow, and I put a link up there so you can check it out. It's a little long. It's about 90 minutes long, but it talks about you know, using carbon to farm with, and how these new techniques in growing are going to help the environment and also help us with our air. I'm not an expert in it or anything, but this is something that I just saw, and the guys that made the documentary have a website, and it's pretty exciting what they're doing with growing plants and vegetables. So.
And then what was your other? You also mentioned the Biggest Little Farm. What's that?
Yeah, that is a documentary that was recommended to me by one of my environmentalist friends, and I haven't had a chance to see it yet, but she highly recommends it.
Okay, well, yeah, we enjoy your enthusiasm and interest in this topic. We all need to get on board with it. And like you said, you're not an expert, me neither. Carolyn is, but we can sure stir the pot pretty well here and get everybody excited to talk about it and to think about the little things or big things like buying a car. I haven't done that yet. Like Carolyn, I'm liking my old car with its 250,000 miles pretty well. I'll have to admit it's a bit of a gas guzzler. I won't name the name. Mention it.
Well, you might even think of it on an electric bike because, you know, if you're going to be doing work around where you live, you know, an electric bike is a nice way to get.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I've seen those electric bikes. I think they're darling.
Oh, but when you mentioned about carbon use, biochar, I had a student that just finished his master's studying biochar production. So looking.
What is that?
It's the residual from plant biomass. That,
interesting.
Yeah, that you can turn into, and whether you use it for fuel or whether it's worthwhile to put it onto farms to condition the soil.
And to our audience, if you'd like to, you know, join the conversation up here on the panel, just raise your hand for me. If you're over here on Zoom, I can see your hand. If you're on Facebook, I can't. So if you wanted to be part of the discussion, next time come in through the Zoom link and I can throw you on the panel. So anybody here who wants to join the three of us, by all means, just throw your hand in the air for me. I see that Sinead says she's bragging. She says her car has 354,000 miles. So you're 100,000 ahead of me.
Yeah, I do. What other project I could say? I have another student working on biocement. So using microorganisms, bacteria, and this is in Brazil, and trying to form a better way instead of asphalt for logging roads. So that helps to improve water quality, reduce sedimentation, and improve stability of the roads, but using a natural substance.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I've been late getting on the climate wagon. I've been, you know, very much an advocate for a lot of different things, mostly groups that have been marginalized. That's always been my kind of thing. But I realize that they're not going to be even any marginalized groups if I don't get on the climate wagon here. There's literally going to be no human population. And I do believe in reincarnation. I'm not exactly sure the form it takes. I'm not sure it's linear. Like so many people think that it's, you know, you leave and then you come back. I'm not too positive about that. My own perception is more we have parallel lives. I think we're living on different planes at the same time. I've had a lot of information, not so much about myself, but about other people that I'm working with when I'm in a little bit of an altered state. So let me just segue for a minute. If we just have a few minutes left, I want to talk about, we have an event starting next Thursday, just a week from today, here in Ojai, and we still have a few seats, not many. We're almost sold out. It's going to be a pretty big deal, and it starts on Thursday morning with a dozen of my most advanced level 5 students who are each speaking on a different topic. And it's all day Thursday. It's sort of my gift to the community. And then our actual workshop starts at 5:30 on Thursday night. We'll open at that time, and it runs all weekend, runs till after lunch on Sunday. And people are coming from all over the world. It's going to be a pretty exciting deal. I'm really glad to be seeing everyone. And it's hosted at the Ojai Valley Inn. They are now officially, our room block is sold out. We don't have any more rooms there. But you can still get a room somewhere in town, somewhere around. So we are officially out of time. It's been great being with you guys, and I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm to meet Carolyn and hear what she has to say, and hear my not very educated comments about the climate. But I just think we all needed to spend at least an hour on it, and I'm going to go look at electric cars. All right, everybody. See you next week.
Thanks.
Take care.
Deborah.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.